Did you hear that 91% of guys that use Dove Men Plus Care antiperspirant recommend it? Dove Men Plus Care user James said that it has some kind of clever formula in their design to look after the pits. Guess that makes Dove Men Plus Care antiperspirant the smart choice then, James. Pick some up at your local retailer today.
Back and better than ever. Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. Jay Bilas and Mel Kiper, both on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line coming up in this hour. What was that note about A-Rod that just flashed by here? Is that we have that exactly right? A-Rod will be eligible for the Hall of Fame for the first time in 2022. That will correspond with the last year under the current rules of eligibility for Bonds and Clemens.
For Bonds and Clemens before they go to the Veterans Committee, right?
Yeah, under the current, under the baseball writers.
Wow.
So I guess in theory, Bonds and Clemens could get in before that.
Right.
But otherwise, you would have A-Rod in his first year and Bonds and Clemens in his last year. If you're just joining us, it's, I think, a really good conversation we've just stumbled onto here with the hiring of Jose Canseco, which stunned me a little.
I did as well because, again, we talk about the book Juiced, and we talked about where that all ended up and how that started things. He has said some outlandish things out there that now a MLB team, the A's, have hired him to be their announcer. And you go through his Twitter feed, you're like, wow, he's like out there a bit at times, but he'll definitely say things, and it will get attention.
But it did get us to thinking, and Mike, you correctly brought up the right names. Barry Bonds is currently employed by a Major League Baseball team. Mark McGwire is currently employed by a Major League Baseball team. Alex Rodriguez is has been hired to play an extraordinarily high-profile role on a network which is I think the most significant broadcast partner of Major League Baseball. Should those be interpreted as signs to the baseball writers? The sport has forgiven them, or has forgiven them.
Has forgiven them. Yes,
absolutely,
forgiven them.
And thus you should too. Here's a little bit of the Twitter on that. 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed. Drew tweets: Bonds was a Hall of Famer before steroids. Big Mac was not. That's a very hard thing to parse, right? That's a very hard. At what exact point did each of these? We think we know with Bonds.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure with a lot of other people.
No, we don't. I don't know if people are going to start nitpicking about that or that's going to be the difference if they finally get voted in. I thought this interesting from Priscilla. I say keep the pariah out of the game of baseball and off camera and away from the mic. I wonder, Priscilla, do you think that about all sports or just baseball? Because that's what I've said forever. Baseball, you want their pariah and you want them wiped out. Other sports, especially in my sport of football, it's how soon are they back? What games are they missing? So, Priscilla, I wonder if you mean all sports or any steroid user. If not, I'm sorry, then that's a hypocritical statement. I'll stand by that. It just is. To me, you can't pick and choose and say, okay, you're a pariah in baseball, but if you do it in football or another sport, you're not. Go ahead and do what you want. Now, she may think that way about all sports. We'll see, but she only mentioned the baseball, so I guess I'm asking her that question. If it's bad in baseball and you want them out, shouldn't you feel that same way about all the other sports?
And is pariah really the right word? Okay, these are guys who did something that everyone acknowledges you shouldn't do, but everyone was doing it. And that's the reason I changed my perspective for people who've been with us long enough. And if you actually read the first book I ever wrote, which I wrote in 2004, I wrote that I did not believe that people who use steroids should be anywhere near the game. And then my opinion changed because at that time I thought it was like 8 people. And now I realize it was probably something in the neighborhood of 50% of the sport. So you have to adjust your thinking, in my opinion, in a reasonable way. And I think we should just address this one, and then Bilas jumps in here. Matthew writes, why is betting for your team to win worse than cheating the game by taking steroids? I've heard a lot of people say that. Right. It's totally misguided in the case of a manager. All right, let's be clear. If you are the manager of a baseball team, as Pete Rose was the manager of the Cincinnati Reds, and betting on his team to win, a manager has to have 2 views, right? Long-term and short-term. So if you have money on today's game and not tomorrow's.
Well, that's short-term.
How is that going to impact? How are you going to use your bullpen?
Right.
Are you using a player who might be a little bit injured? All sorts of decisions that you might make. You think to yourself, betting on a win, what's the big deal? It's a big deal.
Yes, it is.
All right? So even more so for a manager than for a player. So I have no problem.
Because the manager has control over the entire lineup. Absolutely right.
I have zero issue with Pete Rose lifetime banishment from the sport. And zero issue with that. I still think he should be in the Hall of Fame. Okay, Mike and Mike, we got a lot working here. And speaking of baseball, how about Hembo? He's doing a Facebook Live today with Roberto Alomar, and he's asking for your help. You can hop on the Mike and Mike Facebook page and send in your questions for the Hall of Famer, and he'll be doing the Facebook Live this morning, 11 Eastern, so right an hour after our show, live on Facebook. It's Roberto Alomar and Hembo.
So he's looking for help for questions. I just thought he was looking for help.
Well, I mean, he requires help in a variety of areas.
I just thought it was just a general ask for help.
But one way or another, we'll see. That's coming up an hour after the show today. Coming up this weekend, of course, is the Final Four in Phoenix, and already there and up bright and early and saving a lot of time because he doesn't have to shave this morning is our friend Jay Bilas, who joins us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Good morning, Bilas.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Well, we're fine.
Well.
How's the beard? That's the real, again, because of Gonzaga getting into the Final Four, Jay has to grow the Karnowski beard. How is it coming in so far?
It really looks fabulous. I think you'd be impressed, not only with the growth, but the way I look. I mean, I think I go back to my original statement that I'm going to need security to keep the ladies off of me because it's that impressive.
Does it save you time on the mornings you usually, if you shave in the morning or not, and now that you don't have to, does it actually give you a little more time?
Oh, yeah. It's not shaving is a lot easier than I expected it to be because I shave just about every day, but not having to worry about that. And I've been approached by companies, a couple different companies that sell products for your beard, which I didn't imagine there were. I guess there are certain non-shave products that are just as popular as shave products. So I've got that going for me, which is nice.
It's a whole new world for you, Bill. As Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. Okay, we had a question yesterday on our fill in the blank, and we'll ask it to you. If you, of the four teams that are remaining, if you had to choose one player that you would most like to have on your team of the four remaining teams in the Final Four, which player would you choose?
Sindarius Thornwell of South Carolina, because he is, first of all, like he's a stud. He's just a man out there, but he plays at a really high level on both ends of the floor. You know, he was the SEC Player of the Year, but he's also the best defensive player in the league, and Defensive Player of the Year. And I think he's a player that is respected at both ends of the floor, and not everybody in the game is.
How about of the four teams left, because we had them up, and these were the best players that we're choosing from. How about who's been the most surprising to you in a good way of these four teams through the four games?
Oh, Luke May, no question. That for him to have played, Luke May averaged about 5 points a game during the season, and he's a good player that is going to be very, very good, I think. And he adds a terrific dimension to that core of big guys that North Carolina has because he can stretch the floor. You can bring him in. He can knock down a three. And earlier in the year, he had 15 rebounds against Florida State. When Isaiah Hicks was injured the day before the first Duke Carolina game that was played at Duke, he wound up starting that game. And I think if I remember right, he had 10 points in the game and played fearlessly. But for him in the last two games, I think I have this right, against Butler and Kentucky, he had 33 points in the two games, 60.5 a game, and shot over 60% from the field and over 60% from three. And he's been the most surprising in a good way.
Yeah, and we were just showing it on television, but many people probably saw, because it went viral, the video of him. He hits the biggest shot in the world. Yeah. And he showed up his 8 a.m. class the following morning and got a standing ovation.
Bigger shocker, the standing O or showing up at the 8 o'clock class.
It's probably 50-50. And then, the fact Roy Williams came on and told us that when he originally wanted him there, he didn't have a scholarship for him. He was going to come as a walk-on, and he got the scholarship. So it's one of those great college sports stories. All right, Mike and Bilas. So now let's get to the basketball. For those who didn't see a lot of Gonzaga this year, all the talk, of course, is about their bigs, and particularly Karnowski. But as I have watched them closely, and I did some scouting, of course, when Northwestern was playing them, it seems to me the two best players on that team are neither of the two bigs that everyone talks about, but it's the point guard, Nigel Williams-Goss, and this guy, Jonathan Williams, who I think won the game for them the other day, or was the best player for them the other day. He's an athletic sort of, I don't know, would you call him a wing or whatever it is? Those are the two guys that have jumped off the page at me. Jay, what are your thoughts?
Well, Nigel Williams-Goss has been their best player all year. He's been in the National Player of the Year conversation from the middle of the year on, and has had multiple games where he's been around 30 points or over 30. I think he had 36 against San Francisco early in the year. I think what sets Gonzaga apart from prior Gonzaga teams that have been very, very good and have reached a Sweet 16 or Elite Eight, teams like that, is that, one, they're very balanced. They have 4 really good guards, and they have 4 really good big guys. Jonathan Williams I would put in the front court category. And then they have major conference recruits. And I think sometimes when people hear the word mid-major, they think it's it's not a flattering term, but I don't mean it that way. But they've got, like, Nigel Williams-Goss started at Washington. He was a McDonald's All-American, and Jonathan Williams he's from Memphis and the nicest kid you've ever met. But he went to Missouri and then transferred to Gonzaga. And Jordan Matthews was at Cal. He played 4 years at Cal, and then was a graduate transfer. So, these guys are major conference players that transferred in. And then they've got other guys that are really good players that they've recruited over the years. So they're balanced between their guards and their front court, and then the fact that they're great defensively. I mean, not good. This is by far Gonzaga's best defensive team. And, I think you're right on Williams that he's a lefty. Not a great shooter, but he can knock threes down. He can stretch you a little bit, but he can really drive it. He can finish. And he's an excellent rebounder and a very versatile defender that you can put on just about anybody. So they can switch a bunch of screens. They play different defenses. They're really, really talented defensively, and I think that's what makes them different from prior Gonzaga teams. And why, when guys like, when all of my colleagues were saying, hey, we were all saying, hey, they're legit, and people were going, well, we've heard that before, and they lost in the Sweet 16, stuff like that. No, this is different. They defend differently. They're much better than people think.
Well, let's bring that up with South Carolina, because to the numbers, they're next. They're second to Gonzaga with that defense. And we all know about Thornwell. He's been unbelievable. But universally, we seem to hear that they are the toughest team defensively from the physicality standpoint, that they're just that tough, physically. So talk about them and their defensive side of the ball and the problems that could bring for Gonzaga.
I think the difference, Mike, is that South Carolina is really hard to get around. Like they are really physical. They play you chest to chest. They pick you up. It's more of a half-court defensive team, but they pick you up at the half-court line. Their help is really good, so you're always playing. You seem like you're playing 1-on-5 all the time. But it's hard to get a straight-line drive off of them. So it's hard to put them into help. And it's really hard to play like drive and kick basketball. And it's hard to turn the corner. You can't get to the basket. It's really, really difficult. And they don't, as physical as they are, they don't foul very much. So it's not like you're shooting a bunch of free throws. I don't think until you've been through it, you realize just how tough they are defensively. And the problem for South Carolina all year long, like even now with the way they've played in the tournament, they've played at a higher level in the offensive end of the tournament than they did all year. They're still ranked outside of the top 100 in offensive efficiency. That's unusual for a team to get this far, and they have performed at a much higher level offensively in the tournament than they did before the tournament. And their defense has been a constant, but without their offense performing at a higher level, they wouldn't be here. That's been a huge factor in their moving forward to this point.
Mike and Jay Bilas, so just finishing up on that game, how many pros are we watching on the floor in that game? In the Gonzaga, South Carolina, is Thornwell a pro?
Yeah, I think Thornwell's an NBA player. Yeah, I think he'll make it.
Is Williams?
That's a little closer call. He'll have a chance because of his athleticism. He doesn't shoot it particularly well. That's not a strength of his. But he's one of those guys at his size. It may be a little more difficult for him.
Nigel Williams-Goss?
But I think he is, yes. He's not a superior athlete. And at those positions, at the point guard position, he's big and he's got size and he can score and he knows how to play. But do I think he's an NBA player? I do. But it's not a no-brainer.
And then the last one, of course, is Karnowski. I mean, he's been as talked about as any player. He's been in college, it feels like, for 20 years.
That's the most wins.
And he's so distinctive looking, and soon, Jay, you will look just like him. Is he an NBA player?
I think so, but the problem is, he's had a back injury, and then, he lost a lot of time with all the problems that he had with his stomach and all that stuff that came from the back injury and the surgery. He's had back surgeries. And so, playing in the NBA and playing that schedule, that could be difficult for him. He's moving well enough now that I think he could absolutely do it. And so I do think he can play in the NBA and probably will. But again, it's not, that's not a no-brainer. The guy that on Gonzaga's team that's going to be the best pro or the coveted pro is Zach Collins,
right?
The freshman big guy. He played in high school in Las Vegas at Bishop Gorman High School. Steven Zimmerman, who went to Vegas, UNLV, and then went pro after his freshman year, and Chase Jeter, who was the number 11 player in the country when he came out of high school, were on his team and played ahead of him. Zach Collins was considered the third best big guy in his high school team, and he's better than both those guys now. I mean, he's really, really good.
Is he going to be one and done though? I mean, he's a freshman? Is he going pro?
I don't know. I don't think so. But look, in today's game, I assume they're all leaving until they come back. Yeah. So I have no idea what he's thinking. I would be surprised if he went, especially coming out of the culture he's in now. And I think with his talent, I think with some of these guys that are super talented and kind of fit the suit, that they need to be responsible to their talent, but they shouldn't rush it. But that's not the culture that we're living in now.
In the other game, according to KenPom.com, Oregon ranks in the top 20 in both offensive and defense efficiency. Which one will they need to be better at to beat Carolina?
Both, because I think it all fits together. When you hear people talk about Carolina and your transition defense has to be really good, one of the things, I think people think, the simplistic view of, well, boy, you got to get back. You really got to get back quickly. You got to get back efficiently. Yeah, that's part of it. But the other part of it is how your offense operates. That if you take a bad shot, it's going to be a layup. If you take a quick shot, it may be a layup. If you turn the ball over, it's what has come to be called live ball turnovers. If you throw the ball out of bounds, the other team gets the ball, you don't get a shot, you don't get a chance to get fouled, a chance for offensive rebound, sure, but at least you're playing 5-on-5 on the other end. If you turn that thing over live ball, they can take it and they turn it into a layup or dunk. So your offense has to help your defense. You have to run good offense in order to slow North Carolina down. That's a part of it. So I think their offense has to be good, and they present a lot of problems for North Carolina because of some of the matchups with Dylan Brooks and Tyler Dorsey, and you can have a big guy guarding a smaller guy, but there are more problems on Oregon side. I think the biggest issue in that game is going to be the health of Joel Berry. If Joel Berry's healthy, North Carolina's in really good shape, and I like their chances to win and win the whole thing. If he is not, because he's injured both of those ankles badly. I was stunned that he came back and played against Kentucky and played so well. It was to me it was remember he limped in there and then he ran back out. I'm like, what did they have Mr. Miyagi in there? How did that happen? Because he rolled that thing sideways and it's his other ankle. That wasn't the injured one. So he's playing on two, sort of what I would consider badly injured ankles. And if he's not healthy, then I think Oregon has not only a puncher's chance, but has a great chance to win.
And yet you said all along, I remember it going all the way back to the beginning of the season, that all other things being equal, if everyone plays their best, Carolina is the best team. Would you right now, if I told you had to bet an amount of money that mattered to you, would you pick Carolina still right now to win the whole thing?
Yeah, I think the two best teams are Carolina and Gonzaga. I think that would be a great final. But I've really enjoyed all year watching South Carolina play. I did not think their offense would carry them here, so that's been a surprise to me. And I've loved Oregon all year long, but I thought when Chris Boucher got hurt, I thought that was going to be too difficult to overcome. And it's hard, it's kind of hard to believe. Like I wasn't thinking about this possibility when Derek Walton had a shot in the air to beat Oregon. It's remarkable that they've done this without one of their best players. Their third leading scorer, second leading rebounder, and leading shot blocker. It's really absolutely remarkable that they've accomplished this.
Final Four is in Phoenix. If you see Jay Bilas, get a close look at his face. It won't look the same as usual. Thank you, Bilas. Thanks for getting up early. We appreciate it.
Jay.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's Jay Bilas live in Phoenix as we get set for this weekend's Final Four.
I think South Carolina obviously is the biggest surprise here, but I agree with Boucher being out. who expected Oregon to make this run? I mean, to go this, I did pick them in a couple of games and then had them out saying, okay, I think they can only go so far. And then to that, I do think it will at least justify the regular season a little bit if Gonzaga gets to the finals and or wins this thing by having only one loss. Because we always say, boy, you play this tournament over 10 times, you could get 8 different winners. Who knows? But and a lot of times that can be true. But it's nice. It would be nice to see if you do end up with the top team being what a lot of people thought could have been the top team all year.
Yeah, and if you have North Carolina Gonzaga in the final, you have two 1 seeds.
Yeah, you do.
So you have. Let's say there was an argument over maybe 1 or 2 other teams that could have been on the one line. You have inarguably two of the top 5 or 6 teams in the country. So that feels fully satisfying. If South Carolina wins, it's a stunner.
Right.
Oregon, less of a stunner, but still a bit stunning. And the thing that sometimes I wonder about with Boucher getting hurt, the kid at Oregon, and then you see this guy Jordan Bell just step in and all of a sudden dominate these games.
Someone gets a chance, more of a chance.
That's exactly it, right? That's exactly it.
Right, how you step up and who stepped up more, and that's why I asked the question that Jay said, how about Luke May from North Carolina and that kid's story and what he's doing now. 5 points during the regular season, averaging 12.5 now in the tournament, 16.5 in the last 2 games.
Were you surprised that he was at his 8 o'clock lecture the following morning?
Very.
I mean, I think
I'm glad he got a standing O, but yeah, I was a little surprised.
Just the sort of cynical-minded people that we are now about big-time college sports, that would be like the furthest thing from your mind. Is he going to be at an 8 a.m. lecture after hitting the biggest shot of his life?
I think what I'll say is when I'm not considered a star, and he is not, and you make a shot like that, I'm probably up at 5 in the morning just walking around in public. Going into the bagel shop, the local, breakfast place.
No one can buy you anything.
Oh, yeah. No,
you can go into the bagel shop. They can't give you one free.
No,
they cannot for this whole thing. He'll never buy another breakfast. Yes, he will.
Until he leaves.
They're not allowed to give it to him.
But they can slap him on the back and shake his hand.
Yeah.
So you have a couple of your buddies coming over tonight for the game. How you feeling this year about your bracket? When you head to Walmart to pick up Coca-Cola 6-packs and Powerade 8-packs for tonight's tip-off, you have to check out this site with NCAA March Madness tips, Coke.com/alwaysready. It's full of fun stats and tips that you usually don't think about when you're filling out your bracket. So not only does Walmart have everything you need to be ready for the tip-off like Coca-Cola and Powerade, but if you head to Coke.com/alwaysready, they're helping you with your bracket as well.
I have actually succeeded in something today. Mel Kiper, and it was just posted on ESPN.com, has regraded last year's drafts. It was sent to me early. And I managed not to blow it.
Good job out of you.
I blow these mock drafts all the time. I'm very bad at keeping things a secret, but this one I managed to hold on to. But if you are interested, you can check that out on ESPN.com right now. And Mel Kiper Jr. is with us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Good morning, Mel.
Good morning, gentlemen.
We got a bunch of things going on here. We're now less than a month away from the draft, so we're really getting into the nitty-gritty. So you've seen the combine performances come and go. The pro days have come and gone. We're seeing talk of individual meetings right now. What do you see becoming the headlines over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to this thing?
It's the quarterbacks. So where does Deshaun Watson, Clemson, Mitchell Trubisky, North Carolina go? And I think the Cleveland Browns, the Arizona Cardinals, still in the middle of the first round. We'll have to figure all that out. What happens with Garoppolo? Is he not traded? That means Cleveland will have to probably draft a quarterback. I think the 2 quarterbacks, and then who falls in at number 3? Patrick Mahomes, we had talked about a couple weeks ago, becoming red hot, quarterback out of Texas Tech. We had heard Arizona, Houston, some others like him. That could impact what they do in the middle of the first in regards to Trubisky and Watson. Does Mahomes become a late 1? Does somebody trade in there and get him? Does he drop into the early mid-second? This will be a lot of intrigue with the quarterbacks, as it always is.
Right now, neither you or Todd have any quarterback going in the top 10. But you know how teams value it, and you know that position. On the actual draft day, what are the odds you think one of these quarterbacks does go in the top 10?
I don't think so right now, Mike. I think those teams are so interested now in getting players who can help them win this year. They went out, Chicago did, and got Mike Lennon, McCown to the Jets. They had drafted Hackenberg in the second round last year. We had talked about all this. So the Chargers, you're looking for an heir apparent to Phillip Rivers when you got to get help for Rivers now. To me, I think that's why the quarterbacks drop a bit. And keep in mind, None of these guys are considered franchise quarterbacks, which means nothing. Prescott wasn't considered a franchise quarterback either, and some that were never developed into those types of players. But the perceived franchise quarterback is not there. There's mixed opinion all over the board on all these quarterbacks. There's no consensus that everybody's sold on any of these quarterbacks as being great NFL starters. So to project them in the top 10 is not going to happen, I don't believe.
By the way, the people who cover the Jets, all of whom I follow on Twitter, are reporting that the Jets are meeting with Trubisky today. Mike and Mel, the other thing that you have been steadfast on for years is that no team should take a running back in the first round. Well, this is a year loaded with running backs. Fournette up near the top. Some people love Dalvin Cook and McCaffrey, who is both a running back, and I'm reading a lot of things about his skills as a receiver. What would be your stance or your take on drafting those guys super high?
I don't think you should, but somebody are because they have the ability, as you said, Mike. It's not because of what happened with Zeke Elliott. That's not impacting any of these running backs. That has nothing to do with it. They're rated and evaluated as individuals. This happens to be a great group. Fournette was the number one player coming out of high school. Dalvin Cook's a game breaker, but his stock has dropped to the late first, early second. McCaffrey, you can put him in a slot, line him up as a wide receiver, punt, kickoff returner. He's much more than a running back. That's why he's a mid-first round possibility right now. Then we have the wild card Joe Mixon at Oklahoma. So these running backs are ranked and rated based on how they perform in college, projecting to the NFL, not about the fact that Zeke Elliott had a great rookie year. I brought up the point, 11 of the 12 playoff teams did not have a first-round running back. But you're going to have probably 3 running backs go in round 1.
The guy, I think, with the widest range of praise and or criticism about him has got to be Jabril Peppers from Michigan. So where do you think he eventually ends up?
Mike, it's been all over the board with Peppers. I had thought early first round initially, dropped him to the late first round. Does he settle in the middle of the first? Teams are trying to figure him out. How does he fit into an NFL defense? You know he'll be a great return man right away. You know he's an explosive athlete. You know you're going to get something out of Peppers. What it is, nobody can really identify right now. At least some teams can't. That's why they pushed him down a bit. But I think he goes. Dallas would be a splash pick for the Cowboys. Jerry Jones loves that. They need a safety. So I think he goes in the first round, where right now it's hard to really figure. I'd say mid to late first.
Mike and Mel, I mentioned that your regrading of last year's NFL draft is now available on ESPN.com. Give our audience a couple of the highlights. Mel, who, having had now a year to see where some stuff fell, who was the biggest mover? Whose draft turned out to be a lot better than you thought, and how about the opposite as well?
The obvious is the Dallas Cowboys with Romo's injury. You couldn't predict that. You need a crystal ball. You have to be a psychic. Once that happened, it allowed Dak Prescott behind that great line with Zeke Elliott to have the big year. I think that bumped them up to that A- area. People say, why not an A+? Well, Jalen Smith went 34th. Third pick in the second round. They knew they'd have to medically redshirt him. What did they get out of him moving forward? They could have had Hunter Henry, an heir apparent to Jason Witten at tight end. Deion Jones, excellent linebacker with the Falcons. Sterling Shepard, Michael Thomas, 2 really good rookie receivers. But they took a player that they knew they would have to medically redshirt, probably a round earlier than a lot of people would have.
Yeah, but Jason Witten, by the way, signing a 4-year extension as well. How about on the other side? How about a team that was graded high and then it just didn't work out so well for them?
Well, we'll have to see about the Redskins, Mike. Josh Dotson did not play. It was no factor with the injury. Now you have Dotson in the equation with Terrell Pryor, Brian Quick, Jamison Crowder, Jordan Reed. So they got some big receivers now. Dotson coming back. How does he perform? Sua Cravens did a decent job as a second-round pick. But a lot of these teams were impacted by injuries to either first- or second-round picks, the Redskins being one of those with Josh Dotson.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million, what color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
I did find this an interesting comment from Jerry Jones. This is from USA Today this morning, talking about Tony Romo. Quote, I have his interest at the top of my list. How this thing evolves over the next few weeks or months will be dictated by what Tony wants to do. End quote. Now, we have talked a lot this morning and many other mornings about Carmelo Anthony, his no-trade clause, and thus the power that he has. Romo doesn't have that, but NFL contracts, especially the kind like he has, is They are prohibitive in some cases, so they limit the options that teams have. So, Mike, I would ask you two separate questions on that. Do you believe it? And should it be the case?
Well, let me start with the second one. No, it shouldn't. If you can work it out to where it works out for him, great. But the best interest should be the Dallas Cowboys. And so you have to decide for yourself, are you ever going to get anything of value for him in a trade? Do you just wait and wait and wait, and knowing somebody will get injured, and then maybe you will get somebody of value? If you think that's the best move and you think that's a good possibility of it happening, you know what? I would understand it. It certainly wouldn't be in the best interest of Tony Romo. If he's waiting for Tony Romo, maybe it's too easy for us to sit, from 30,000 feet above and to say, boy, the best situation for Tony Romo, wouldn't that be the Houston Texans? I mean, they are ready-made. The number one defense, a ton of weapons on offense. They got rid of their quarterback who they had the bad money underneath. It's the perfect fit. So if we think that, but more importantly, what if Tony Romo is saying that right now? I want to go play for the Texans. Then if that's the case, wouldn't Jerry Jones say, okay, we're going to release you and you can go sign with them? Isn't that basically what Jerry Jones is saying? So
isn't that ultimately what he's probably going to do?
But then I guess the point is then if you're waiting for Tony to tell you what you want to do, most of us believe that's what he would want to do. Maybe Tony doesn't know. Maybe Tony is contemplating retirement. Every network in the world would hire him. He's as hot as could be right now. He'd make good money. Wouldn't make, starting quarterback money doing that. But he would start a second career, which could be as long a career as he would want it to be, probably. So maybe he doesn't know. I guess that's what I do as an analyst now, is say, boy, that's the fit. If he wants to play, that's the fit. How do you get Tony Romo to the Texans? Because you have to believe the Texans want him. And if Tony Romo wants to continue playing, boy, what a position to be in. You're in a division that's not very difficult, quite honestly. You have the number one defense, and you have an offense that's really, really growing. Why wouldn't you want to be there if you want to play? So if, in fact, what Jerry Jones is saying is true, then maybe Tony hasn't made up his mind on what he wants to do. But if he has, you would think the place would be is, hey, Jerry, I want to go play in Houston. How do we make that happen?
The other side of it that's just interesting is, are you worried about the thing coming full circle? If you just release him, if you grant him his outright release without any conditions on it, and once you release him, there are no conditions.
Right.
I'll continue to point out, the Jets, once upon a time, did the nice guy thing. They did right by a guy who had been a loyal soldier for them for a long time by giving Chad Pennington his outright release when they traded for Brett Favre. Chad wound up signing with the Dolphins in their division. He wound up winning the AFC's Comeback Player of the Year, and he wound up beating the Jets the last week of the season to get into the playoffs. So are you a little worried about that possibility?
The first thing I would say is, let's go to your division. Nobody in your division needs a quarterback. So he's not going
with
there.
The extremely unlikely exception of Washington figuring out a way to trade Kirk Cousins and bringing in Romo. Right. In theory, that could happen. No one expects
But where it stands right now, and so then let's go further. Who's the team in the NFC that we're worried about him going there and challenging the Cowboys within the next year or two? I know the 49ers need a quarterback.
Right. No, that's not one.
That's not one. So the two teams we keep talking about for a quarterback of that age, of a guy who can get you there right now, is Denver, and they keep talking less and less about it, and Houston. So unless there's an NFC team I'm not thinking of, and I don't mean a rebuilding NFC team because Tony Romo is not the quarterback for you if you're a rebuilding NFC team. So I don't know who that team would be for that to be, because I agree with you about the legitimate worry. But I'm going through the teams in my head, and I'm thinking,
who's better, Tony Romo or Sam Bradford?
Well, I think in a vacuum, Tony Romo, but you don't know if he's going to get hurt. That's the big thing. And
that's true everywhere he goes, though, right?
It's exactly right.
No matter who gets him, you cannot put all your eggs in the Tony Romo basket, right? We agree on that? Because if you're Houston, you can't say, all right, we got Romo, now we're good.
And I don't think I think Bradford was represented enough to where you're not saying, okay, we tried that for a year. Teddy Bridgewater probably won't play next year. We're giving up on Bradford.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
But is he better? If he's better, then maybe that's a better option. I don't know. You asked a question. I'm trying to think of one.
Right.
I'm in Arizona. They do have Carson Palmer coming back.
Palmer.
If Romo's healthy, he's better than Palmer. But he's not necessarily.
But they're not
healthy.
doing that. I don't think Arizona
they won't do
would
that.
do it.
No,
they
Arizona
would bring
won't
a
do
young
that.
guy in.
No, of course not. So you're right. It probably won't happen. It probably isn't a problem. So they probably will ultimately just give him his release. Shefty was on here yesterday saying that he's seriously considering the broadcasting
right.
offer.
And the only way he's getting the trade is if something the backs against the wall of another team with an injury, so they desperately need Romo.
And that probably isn't going to happen anytime particularly soon.